Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass.net. So this last couple of weeks you might have seen an advert for the upcoming Chord Tone Essentials course. It's released on the 8th of September and I'm super excited about it. In that advert you might have heard a funky little bass line running in the background that sounds like this. Now, I wrote that groove partly as incidental music, but I also wanted to give a little insight into the kind of bass line that you'd be able to construct using the principles outlined in the course. So in this lesson, I'm going to break that bass line down and look at the chord tones, and more importantly, the non-chord tones that are being used. First of all, I'll just run through the notes of that bass line, and then afterwards we'll have a look at the construction and how you can start building those kind of bass lines yourself. So we're in the key of C, kind of. We're implying a C7 chord. Don't worry about that yet. We'll look at that later. And the first little segment sounds like this. Okay. So we have C, 3rd fret of the A string, and then we move on to the G string, have a ghost note, and then we have B flat, B natural, C. So 3rd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret. Bear in mind, instead of the ghost note, you could also use the open string because we're moving by quite quick. But, you know, it is intended to be a ghost note and it sounds as a ghost note even if you use the open string. So then we move down onto this little chromatic run where we have, okay, so we have a ghost note to begin with. Then we have A flat, G, D, E flat, E. Okay, so in terms of the frets, 7, 6, 5, 0, 1, 2. Okay? And then we're back to the C. So, all together. Okay? So, again, when we get to the A flat G, you could also use the open string, the open D, as the ghost note. But really try working on that ghost note anyway. For the second segment, we have the following. Okay, so we have same start again, C, B flat, B natural, okay? That's the same as the first segment. Then we have ghost note on the D string, and then we come up. So E, F, F sharp, G. In terms of the frets, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so. Okay, so if we put both of those segments together, the third segment is exactly the same as the first, so we just have a repeat of. And then for the final segment, segment 4, we have. Okay, so we have. We've got the C, B flat, B, C, same as all of the segments, and then we have ghost note, D, D sharp, E. So 7, 8, 9 for the frets on the G string, okay? And again, instead of the ghost note, you could use the open G string. Okay? So either way, it doesn't matter. So then we just put them all together. So practice the riff slowly, gradually build up speed, and then you can try with the backing track, which is available from talkingbass.net. Just follow the link in the info below. So now let's have a look at what that groove is made of. So the groove is centered around a C7 chord and arpeggio. So just in case you didn't know, C7 is also called a C dominant 7, so it's a dominant 7 chord. And to create a dominant 7 chord, we take a basic major triad and then we add the minor 7 to it, or flat 7, okay? So just in case you didn't know any of that, a C major triad is C, E, and G. So root note, major third, and perfect fifth. So on a C, we have C, E, G there, 3rd fret A string, 2nd fret, 5th fret D string. That's a C major triad. Then we add that flat 7 there, the minor 7th onto the top. So we have C, E, G, B flat. Okay, that's a dominant 7 arpeggio. And that's used a lot in these kind of funky sounding bass lines. Okay, so C, E, G, B flat. So B flat at the 3rd fret of the G string. Just get used to that arpeggio. Then we can add the C onto the top, 5th fret of the G string. And then if you want to learn all of the notes in that area, it's worth coming down below there. So we can have the B flat there, 1st fret of the A string. Then down to the G, and then down to the open E, okay? So work all the way up, then come back down, then go below as well. So B flat, which was the B flat up here, G, which was the G up there, and the E, which was also the E up there. So that's all of those chord tones of the C7 there in that open position. Well, I say open position, it's actually a first position. But so that gives you a palette of notes there to work from, and that's going to be our framework for this riff. Now, if any of that information is new to you, or it sounds complicated or anything like that, that's where the Chord Tone Essentials course comes to the rescue, because in the first module, I run through the chord construction principles for pretty much every chord you're ever going to encounter. So don't worry, whatever the chord is, whatever the extensions, whatever it is, you'll be able to play the arpeggio, the appropriate arpeggio, okay? So, back to the dominant 7 chord. As I mentioned, they're really, really good for these kind of funky bass lines. So I'm just going to play a drum beat and just make up a bass line using only the notes of that C7 chord, okay? And you'll know that familiar sound, okay? Okay, so again, that is using only the notes of the C7 arpeggio. So that's chord tones, but what are all those other little notes in the advert line? Well, I'm simply using double chromatic approach notes and chromatic passing notes. Now don't worry about that long title. For a double chromatic approach note, we just approach each of the chord tones from 2 frets, either above or below. So if I was to look at C7 again, okay, so just the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and that 7th, we can approach them, each of those notes, from 2 frets above or below. So for the C, the root note, I could approach from above, so that's D, D flat, C, or I could approach from below, B flat, B, C. So in terms of the frets, I could play 5, 4, 3, or I could play 1, 2, 3. Either way, we're just approaching 3, the C. So then if we look at E, the 3rd there, we could approach that as well. So we could try D, D sharp, E. Okay, so I'm using the open string, 1st fret, 2nd fret, or I could approach from above. Okay, so that's 4th fret, 3rd fret, 2nd fret. That one isn't going to be as useful with the dominant 7 chord. You could still do it, but with these kind of lines, some of these little melodic devices, don't work as well as others. So I would advise on the third, on a dominant 7 chord, just approaching from below. Then we can approach the 5th, the G there, 5th fret of the D string. We could approach from above. So that's A flat G, 7, 6, 5, or from below, F sharp G. So 3rd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret, okay? Then for the 7th, so that's the B flat, 3rd fret of the G string. Again, we could approach from above, C, B natural, and then the B flat, or we could approach from below, A flat, A, and then B flat. Again, on a dominant 7 chord, that's not as easy to use. Like I say, you can still do it, it's just that it doesn't sound as useful as the other ones, okay? So, we've got, in order, from root up to the 7th. So just double approaches for each one. Then once we get up to the C there, 5th fret of the G string, again I could approach just as I did down here. We've got the B flat, B natural C, or we could approach D, D flat, C. And again we can move further up. I could go up to the E up here. So instead of this E, we've got the E up here, 9th fret of the G string, and I could approach from below or above, okay? Remember what I said though, it's a lot easier to approach from below. I mentioned this one because it is there in the bass line. So now let's have another look at our bass line and see how these melodic devices have been incorporated, okay? So we begin with this C, the root note, then B flat, B natural, C. So if you think back to the little approach notes that we've just used, we're approaching the octave C there at the 5th fret. We're just approaching that double chromatic approach from below. Okay? You could also see it as a passing note because the B flat is obviously a chord tone, so we're actually bridging the gap in there, and that would be a passing note. But don't worry about all the terminology for this. This is, you know, you're just looking at the C as being the target, and we're approaching, okay? So that's a melodic device. Then we move down. So we have A flat G, D, E flat E, 7, 6, 5, 0, 1, 2 in terms of the frets. All we're doing is we're approaching the 5th, and then we're approaching the 3rd, okay? Both chord tones. We're approaching from above for the first one, from 2 frets above, and then for the E, we're approaching from 2 frets below. The reason all of this works is because we're accenting and we're working around the framework of the C7 there, of the chord tones. If it wasn't for that, the chord tones, we'd have no bearings. We wouldn't have any kind of idea of the chord there, the overall tonality. We're using those chord tones, that chord, as our framework, and then everything else in there, be it scale tones, chromatics, whatever it is, are just working around that framework, okay? So, double approach down to the G, double approach up to the E. For the second segment, we obviously start off exactly the same. That approach to the octave, and then we have this little run up from the 3rd. So in here, we've pretty much got chromatic passing notes in there. So we've got the E, and then we've got the G, okay? 2nd fret and 5th fret, they're the 2 chord tones, and we're filling in the gap between them with the F and the F sharp. So you could see it as possibly a passing note and then a chromatic passing note, or you could see it as a scale and then a chromatic passing note. Whatever you want to see it as, it doesn't matter. The chord tones are our framework again, and we're just bridging the gap in between them, okay? That's all it is. It's passing notes between the 3rd and the 5th, okay? So don't worry too much about the terminology when you hear about auxiliary notes and passing notes and all that kind of stuff. They're just descriptive terms for very, very simple concepts. We've just got the chord tones, and then we've got some scale notes in there occasionally, and we're just bridging the gaps. The chord tones are the framework, and like I say, we're just bridging those gaps. So, okay, so that's the second segment. The third segment is obviously the same as the first, and then for the final part, again, we've got a double approach note up to the 3rd. So think of that E there, just in case you didn't know. There it is, it's the same as that E. It's a major 3rd. So again, the E is a chord tone. We've got that little chromatic approach, and that's a very, very popular move. Okay, you'll hear that a lot in a lot of different bass lines. So, okay, so all together, chromatic approach, 2 chromatic approaches, chromatic passing notes between the 3rd and the 5th, same, chromatic approach to the 3rd. So that's the bass line. What can sound quite complicated on the face of it is really, really simple once you've just learnt a few little melodic devices. Remember, these moves might not work with other chord types the same, and you have to be true to the style that you're playing in. But the more you learn about these devices and how you play around chord tones, the better you'll get at applying them. Always see the chord tones as the framework, and you should be fine. Now, as I've already mentioned, that bass line is taken from the advert for the upcoming Chord Tone Essentials course. The release is next week, September the 8th, and in that course, you'll learn everything there is to know about chord construction principles and how to build arpeggios for pretty much every chord you're ever going to see. You'll then learn how to apply those chord tones all over the bass fingerboard from open string to the highest fret, and that's using a really easy system of position patterns. Then finally, you'll learn how to incorporate chord tones and non-chord tones, including all of the chromatics, into your bass lines in a variety of styles. We'll add them into a soul style, rock style, reggae style, and a jazz style. We'll also look at some cool bass fills and the basics of soloing. So all in all, the information in that course could change all areas of your bass playing and the way you approach music practice forever. So if you want to check out some details and learn more about it, just follow the link in the info below. Okay, I'll see you later.